What's up, everybody? It's John Brody. Starting doing these videos on YouTube. I already showed you the video before. You can reference that. Um, Somebody asked me when they watched last year, was like, "Why are you down here in the basement?" Um, Reasons I'm in my basement because I love my room, but right now it's like hot as hell. If you're in New York, well, shout out to everybody in New York. It's kind of like it's kind of like a heat wave, and in order to keep my room cool, I got to use the AC. And if I go down here, I'm cool anyway, and I don't even got to use nothing. Don't want to waste money. But that's another thing. Yeah. So a lot of people have been asking. Somebody asked me, "What does the word classic mean to you? Whether it's a classic album, a classic movie, what does that mean to you, or song?" Well, a lot of kids these days. Well, I'm a kid, but a lot of like people these days would be like, "Yo, that's a classic, son. His first album was a classic. That movie's a classic," and don't really know what the word means. Well, there's not really like a universal definition, but like classic to me, in case of an album, it's like it means it's timeless. It's flawless. It's not to be everything, but it's a combination usually. It's flawless. It's not one whack song on it or a bad song. You know, it's timeless. I mean, you can listen to it like 30 years later and it's still fresh, and or it changed the game or changed the genre. Like it could be like if whether you're a fan of hip hop, rock, pop, techno, country, anything, you could be like before this album came out, hip hop or whatever was like this, and then after this album came out, it was like this. It like completely flipped the genre or changed the style that everybody was moving to. That's a classic. You know, Current example of a classic that a lot of people like to use that I believe is a classic is Michael Jackson's second album, Thriller, which is a classic. It's a masterpiece. It's one of the best albums, if not the best album in the history of music. It's probably my favorite album of all time. You know, it's a classic for not only being a flawless album, but it's also a classic because it changed the face of music. I mean, Thriller was the first album to use music videos to tell stories, to use it as a promotional, like, to promote your albums, and be like, man, did you see that video? Stuff like that. Before it, videos were like concert footage of like your concert or like your tour and stuff like that. Michael Jackson was the first one to make it like an art form. I mean, you could say he mastered the form of the music video. You know that changed the game. You know what I'm saying? It also broke down a lot of racial barriers with getting him to be played on MTV, like heavy rotation. Like they say, Thriller was being played like once every 45 minutes. Like that, and that's a classic album. You know, and another question people like to ask me is it like, do you have to wait like a certain amount of time, like you have to wait 5 years after or 10 years after to determine something a classic, or from the moment you hear it or let's watch it, it can be determined a classic? Me, it depends. There's some things that you just know. I mean, first time you listen to like Thriller, that's a classic. I mean, come on, it's easy. Or Nas's Illmatic, classic. This album just came out last year, but the first time I listened to it, I knew it was a classic. Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. I mean, classic. Uh, the build up, the hype. I mean, the production was amazing. Lyrically, it was great. Every guest appearance had one of the best verses. I mean, Rick Ross had the best verse of his career. Nicki had the best verse of her career. It's just a brilliant album, you know. And there's some albums that like years later you slept on it, like you didn't check for it that year, or it was nobody checked for it, or like it went undercover, but it's still a dope album. And you have to look years back, you're like, damn, I must have missed that one. That was a dope album, and it might turn out to be a personal classic of yours. um, a perfect example of that is Jay-Z's first album, Reasonable Doubt. His first album, and this is a classic to me. It didn't really it didn't have impact. I mean, it didn't change anything. I mean, it basically incorporated the mafioso themes that Nas had. It was written, um, Raekwon had in Cuban Links. Shout out to Ray, Wu-Tang, and all those guys. The same elements, but it's a brilliant album that was slept on in 1996. So just like to finish up. I mean, there's no real definition. It's just what you make it. And me personally, that what makes a classic. It's a combination of being timeless, changing the game, or being a flawless album. And, that you can look back and be like, that album was perfect. That album was brilliant. And that's just my opinion on it. Tell me what you think. I basically think the same thing about movies. There's some instant classic movies. I mean, Pulp Fiction. First time you see it. I mean, come on, it's a classic. There's some that over time, like Wedding Crashers, that I think is a classic movie now. Listen, I mean, I liked it from before, but watching it over and over again, it has a lot of replay value. I mean, I can watch it anytime, at any scene, and it's still hot. Owen Wilson fell the hell off after that movie. But that's a whole other story. But it's still a really good movie. You know what I'm saying? It's fresh. It's a classic to me. People may not agree, but you know what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, it really is what you make it. But that's just my opinion on what the word classic is, what a classic is. So that's just me. Inbox me or comment on the page and tell me what you think.